Hi all, welcome and welcome back to my channel. In this video, I have a horrific story to share with you out of Daytona Beach, Florida, where an evil dad, well, I can't really state it better than the police chief on the case did, so I'll let him tell you.
The defendant in this incident deserves a special place in the gates of hell for what he did to this mother and these children. Again, I have never witnessed anything this horrific in my entire career.
Just before midnight on November 21st of 2023, desperate 911 calls started pouring into the Daytona Police Department as residents of the Countryside apartment complex on Bevel Road watched flames pouring out of a window of one of the apartments there.
911, what's the address of your emergency?
The address is 1200 Bevel.
911, what's the address of the emergency?
It's going to be 1200 Bevel Road. There's a fire at one of the apartments. There's flames coming out.
We got to clear the building, though, I feel like.
Residents who saw the fire ran to help get the residents out of the building, but there was little they could do but wait for the fire department to arrive.
You can hear both of the callers knocking and trying to get people out.
Anybody's home, please come out. There's a fire. If anybody's home, please come out. There's a fire.
The police chief said that when emergency services arrived on scene, the apartment was nearly engulfed in flames. And when firefighters got inside, they found a mother, 30-year-old Denisha Moore, and her 3 children inside. Moore was dead, and her 11-month-old baby boy was found in his crib in cardiac arrest. Police rescued the 3 children from the burning apartment, began life-saving measures on them, and rushed them to the hospital, where her precious baby boy died, and her 4- and 5-year-olds are currently fighting for their lives. What initially appeared to be a tragic apartment fire, possibly even an accident, turned out to be so much more.
It's very depressing. Like, I'm very torn up about it because I know I couldn't have really done much more, but I feel like maybe if I would have seen it maybe a couple seconds sooner or a few minutes sooner, I could have saved at least the baby, because it sounded like mom wasn't able to help at all. So
You saw them doing CPR on the baby?
I didn't see it because it was all the way down. There was this whole place was completely blocked out. Like, you could not go anywhere. So I didn't actually get to see that, but I did see the firefighters grabbing the kids out of the house and running out with them. So that was a little concerning too, because I didn't actually realize which apartment it was. I didn't realize those were 2 bedrooms. I thought it was the middle apartment, but it's actually the side one. So it's very...
When the medical examiner arrived on scene, it was determined that Moore had been stabbed multiple times, and the fire department found all 4 burners on the stove lit, with a burning pile of papers and a box sitting on the burners, along with a second point of origin for the fire in one of the apartment's bedrooms. Their investigation concluded that the tragic fire was no accident, but it was deliberately set. Set with 3 small children inside, left to die.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jakari Young, Chief of Police. We responded here just shy of midnight in reference to a structure fire. Unfortunately, once on scene, it didn't take us long to realize that the apartment was occupied. It was occupied by a mother and her 3 children. I'm saddened to report that the mother is deceased. With regards to the 3 children, their ages are a 1-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 5-year-old. The 1-year-old was transported to Halifax, but is also deceased. The 4 and the 5-year-old are over at Shands Hospital receiving treatment, but they are still alive, but in critical condition, obviously. We are in the very infancy stages of the investigation, so I don't have much detail, and the next of kin has yet to be notified regarding the mother here. So I can't give you any specifics as far as names. Obviously, again, we're in the infancy stages of the investigation, and as we get more information throughout the day, we will circle back and give you guys an update. But yes, this is a horrific incident. We are literally 2 days out from a holiday that centers around family, and this is what we're here dealing with this morning. So,
can you tell us about, you said 1-year-old, is it a 1-month-old or a 1-year-old? Because we were told 1-month-old by the fire department.
I was told the 1-year-old, but I will get clarification on that. And if I get clarification, that'll be in the next update.
And this is a suspicious fire?
Yes.
It's being investigated as a homicide,
yes.
Murder.
Yes.
Anything
So,
you say about a suspect or anything?
so I can tell you that, after the medical examiner arrived on scene and we were able to actually move the body, that she was stabbed multiple times.
And the baby, anything you say about if the baby was in a crib at the time?
Yes.
Had the baby suffered any physical injuries, or is that death believed to be from the fire?
I don't know that. I don't have that answer.
This is a very, very emotional story.
It is.
And your folks were here covering this.
Yes. And I'm very proud of all the officers that initially responded to the scene, as well as all fire and medical personnel, just their bravery to be able to go in and, do their best to save lives, because if it were not for their actions, there probably would have been more lives lost. But as I stated, I'll give you guys an update later on, or maybe press release as we get more information. Thank you.
Sort of suspect information?
I can't release anything further at this time. Thank you.
When police reviewed surveillance video, they saw a car leaving the complex around the time the fire broke out, and they were able to track that vehicle to 34-year-old Charles Ivy, the father of Moore's 4 and 5-year-old children. And when they went to Ivy's home, they found him loading his car with suitcases, preparing to leave. Police said Ivy did not admit he murdered Moore or set the fire intended to kill his children, but said he did place himself at the apartment around the time of the fire, and they found him to be in possession of Moore's phone. That, coupled with the video of his car leaving the complex, made him their prime suspect.
The man accused of stabbing a woman to death in her Daytona Beach home and later setting it on fire, killing her baby, was booked into jail overnight.
West 2's Volusia County reporter Pamela Combe learned new details about what happened and the man arrested. Pamela.
Hey, good evening, you two. Well, the 34-year-old was arrested and is currently being held without bond. Now, police say they do have undeniable evidence against the suspect. He even placed himself in the apartment complex at the time the murder and the arson happened.
The defendant in this incident deserves a special place in the gates of hell for what he did to this mother and these children.
Daytona Beach Police Chief Jakari Young says this case is one of the worst he's seen in his entire career. This comes after a fire was intentionally started at the Countryside apartment complex. A 10-month-old baby died as a result, and the baby's mom was found stabbed to death, according to police. Chief Young says there were 2 other kids in the home, a 4 and a 5-year-old.
Their injuries were as a result of being left to die in a fully engulfed fire.
The 2 surviving kids are currently in the hospital intubated. They're both 34-year-old Charles Ivy's kids. Ivy is the man arrested for the murder and attempted murder of this family. On Wednesday, he had his first appearance in court. While Ivy did not admit to the murder, Young says detectives placed him in the neighborhood at the time of the crime.
Through technology, we were able to track his vehicle via traffic cameras leaving the area after this incident would have occurred. And he was also in possession, admittedly, of the victim's cell phone.
Ivy, the father of the 2 older kids, faced a judge Wednesday afternoon. Investigators suspect he turned on all 4 stove burners in the kitchen. They found large amounts of burnt paper and a box on top. There was also evidence of a second fire in one of the bedrooms. Why this happened? Investigators are still working to find that out.
But right now, the motive is not clear. It's still not clear. We may never get a clear motive to this.
During his court hearing here at the jail this afternoon, a judge denied bond for him for all 5 charges. We're outside the Volusia County Jail. I'm Patrick Perez, Fox 35.
Moore's family members were obviously shocked after hearing what happened to her and her children, and said they didn't know Ivy, other than they knew she sent the children with him for visitation on weekends. So, they had no idea Moore and her children were in any danger, and they certainly didn't know she was co-parenting with a killer. Her 4- and 5-year-old children, who are just innocent victims, as they all are currently in the hospital fighting for their little lives, and they need all the prayers we can send for them, as well as their loved ones, who are more than likely still in shock after learning about what happened to them. If it wasn't for the heroic efforts of the Daytona Beach Fire Department, those precious children wouldn't be alive today either, and their family would be trying to wrap their heads around planning 4 funerals. As it is, they're dealing with the deaths of a woman they describe as a loving mother and her precious 11-month-old son.
Volusia County, a vigil for the mother and baby who were killed at their apartment in Daytona Beach. 2 of her other kids are in the hospital still. Fox 35's Hannah McKenzie was there and is live in the studio tonight. Hannah, this is just such a troubling time for this family.
Yeah, Marlisa, it really is. Instead of eating turkey and watching football this Thanksgiving, the Moore family lit candles and prayed over the loss of Denisha Moore and her baby Messiah. But there is one thing they tell me they're very thankful for.
Thanksgiving for the Moores different this year.
It's supposed to be about family today, but today it's about family, but it's a sad family, a sad and hurt family.
Denisha Moore, known as Nikki, and son Messiah, killed Tuesday.
I can't understand this. Why did this happen?
Moore's Daytona Beach apartment set on fire. Crews arriving to find the 30-year-old's body with multiple stab wounds. Baby Messiah was pronounced dead at an area hospital, per police.
He was 10 months old. Didn't even get to make it to his first birthday because of this monster.
34-year-old Charles Ivy, now charged in their murders. He and Moore's 2 children, a 4- and 5-year-old, also found inside the burning apartment. They are now at Shands Hospital in Gainesville.
They was intubated, and they were supposed to be waking them up today.
Amelia Moore telling us the Florida Department of Children and Families won't let them near the toddlers, and they don't know why.
We don't know what they saw, we don't know what they heard, and they're going to be screaming for their mother.
The family's gathering somber this year, but not without thanks. They're grateful for the first responders who risked their lives to save Moore's toddlers, Dove and Dakota.
We want to make sure they never forget their mother and know that she loved them.
And tonight, Ivy is in custody facing multiple charges, including 2 counts of premeditated murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, and arson. Live in the studio, Hannah McKenzie, Fox 35 News.
I have to say, I more than agree with the police chief about Ivy deserving a special place in hell, and I hope he gets it. But I'd be lying if I didn't admit that I hope his hell begins while he's still here on this earth, in prison, in general population, after the other prisoners learn about what he has done. Because word on the street is, and has always been, that prisoners don't take too kindly to other prisoners who hurt and kill children. And ironically enough, there's much justice that takes place inside prison walls. The real kind, that makes hell not just a place one imagines, but a real, terrifying nightmare right here on Earth. The police chief had much more to say about what happened that horrifying day in a press conference that I'll play for you in just a moment. And if you're interested, I'll play a second story right after the press conference about another evil monster, so-called dad, who also set fire to his children's home and left them trapped inside as he drove away to safety, that I covered not too long ago, in case you missed it. But first, I want to say that I'll be praying for Denisha's babies to pull through and make full recoveries. And I'll be praying that they have no memory of the horrific things they witnessed the night their mother and baby brother were stolen from them. I also want to thank you for taking the time to listen to their story. Please consider liking this video and subscribing to my channel for more true crime stories. I hope you all stay safe out there. Here is the rest of what the police chief had to say.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. So yesterday I shared with you the preliminary details in reference to the structure fire that developed into the double murder of a 30-year-old mother and her 10-month-old child. and the attempted murder of two of her other children, ages 4 and 5. So this morning, I'm going to share with you more of the details surrounding this tragedy, as this is the most horrendous and horrific crime that I've experienced throughout my entire career. I want to start with my victims. So first and foremost, I want to extend my heartfelt condolences to the family of the victims. My victim is a Denasia Moore, 30-year-old mother who was found deceased inside of that apartment, who suffered numerous stab wounds. Also, her 10-month-old son, who was transported to Halifax Hospital, who also later passed away as a result of his injuries. And then the 5-year-old and the 4-year-old were transported over to Shands Hospital in Gainesville, where they remain at this time. And I believe they're still intubated at this time. My defendant in this is a Charles Leon Ivy. Here's his mugshot. He is 34 years old, and he is the father of at least 2 of those children. We know for a fact he's the father of the 4-year-old and the 5-year-old. So this is most definitely domestic in nature. The defendant has been charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, first-degree arson. His criminal history is fairly minimal. Prior to this incident, he had some traffic violations, some possession of marijuana. There is a domestic incident back in 2016 on one of his former girlfriends, and in 2020, he was named as a suspect in a child abuse case involving one of the children, but that incident occurred outside of my jurisdiction, and I believe that case was no-filed. But with what we witnessed throughout this investigation, the defendant in this incident deserves a special place in the gates of hell for what he did to this mother and these children. Again, I have never witnessed anything this horrific in my entire career. So, the defendant did not confess to what he did, but what he did was he placed himself on scene. He put himself on scene around the time that these murders would have occurred. Through technology, we were able to track his vehicle via traffic cameras leaving the area after this incident would have occurred. And he was also in possession, admittedly, of the victim's cell phone. So we're still doing some legwork as far as the investigation goes, but the evidence is clear. The evidence speaks for itself regarding this defendant. I can't thank my investigators enough. Well, first I want to start with the responding officers. These brave officers, as well as the firefighters, if it were not for their actions, it's possible that the 4 and the 5-year-old would have also passed away. But their swift action saved the lives of the 4 and the 5-year-old because they didn't hesitate. They came on scene, they made entry, and they assisted in getting those children out. So I'm grateful to both my responding officers as well as the firefighters and all the medical staff that responded to that scene. I'm also grateful for my investigators, because these investigators did not stop working on this from the time they responded to the scene. I know that's their job, but most people are out getting ready for the Thanksgiving holiday. They didn't get that opportunity because they were running down leads in reference to this investigation. My team is the best in the business. I firmly believe that. These investigators are top-notch and second to none. And I'm very proud to be their police chief. I also want to thank the state attorney's office, because without them, we would not have been able to get the arrest warrants. So yeah, I'm sure there are going to be questions in reference to some of the evidence, but I'm telling you now, the evidence speaks for itself. And it was so much so that they were very comfortable giving us multiple search warrants and arrest warrants for the defendant. So I'm also grateful to the state attorney's office, and then I'm grateful to the Ormond Beach Police Department, because in the follow-up, this spilled over into their jurisdiction. So we had to do a lot up in Ormond Beach, and they were great hosts to us, and they also did a lot to assist in the investigation. So I'm very, very grateful to them as well. At this time, I'm going to take just a few questions.
I know we didn't say that he did it, but do you know anything about a motive at this point?
I can only tell you that it's domestic in nature, and we're hoping that as the investigators continue to close up some loose ends, that we can get more of a clear motive, but right now the motive is not clear. It's still not clear. We may never get a clear motive to this, but again, this is the most heinous and horrific that I have seen.
Chief, you mentioned the mother getting stabbed and the children getting injured, but were they also stabbed by the man?
The 4 and the 5-year-old suffered no stab wounds. No, only the mother.
Okay, so basically their injuries were either smoking.
Yes, their injuries were as a result of being left to die in a fully engulfed fire.
Okay, where was the guy caught?
He was caught at his residence, leaving his residence. There was a traffic stop that was conducted, and he was caught. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I also wanted to thank my violent criminal apprehension team, because they were instrumental in the takedown of the defendant.
You mentioned Ormond Beach. Was that where he was caught?
Yes, that he resides in Ormond Beach, and he was caught leaving his residence. That's where the traffic stop was conducted.
The woman that was with them driving the car he was in, is she going to be charged with anything?
Nope,
she was third party maybe in this?
Yeah, she doesn't face any charges at this time. She cooperated with our investigation, and she's currently not facing any charges.
And just to clarify, you said the 4 and the 5-year-old didn't have any stab wounds. The mom did. What about the 10-month-old?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Chief, do the victims have any other family locally?
They do have family. I'm not sure if they're local.
How are they reacting to this?
Say it one more time. The victims,
The family of the victims.
they're obviously very distraught. They're very upset.
Chief, I know you said that the suspect was the father of the 4 and 5-year-old. Did he have custody of those 2 children as well, or did she have?
I believe the mother had custody of the children.
Is this completely premeditated? Did he go there with a gas can? I mean, was this all? What did you determine from that, or do you know?
That part is still unclear. But like I said, the investigation is ongoing, and I also wanted to thank the fire marshal as well. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
The story I'm about to share with you is just about as heartbreaking and evil as it gets. Look closely at this video. What you're seeing is an evil father walking out his front door, getting in his car, and driving away as his house burns with his 3 young children inside. The monster's name is Joseph Washington, and in the early morning hours of October 18th of 2023, he set fire to his family's home and murdered his 3 young children. Their mother was at work at the time, and he was home with his 3 children, but he did tell their mother over the phone what he was planning to do before he did it. Here is her desperate 911 call.
New Orleans 911, what's the location of your emergency? Hi, 4911 America Street, New Orleans, Louisiana. He's going crazy. His name is Joseph. Can you please hurry? I'm at work. What's going on? He's screaming on the phone. I heard the kid screaming. He's screaming on the phone. Y'all have to just break through the door before anything happens, please. He said he's about to burn the house on fire. Can you just please hurry?
Their mother raced home from work to get to her babies, but by the time she got there, the house was engulfed in flames, and Washington was gone.
Once I hit the end of my hall, you could just see the house engulfed in flames. And all I could think about is, where are the kids? I saw their mom outside, and I'm yelling, where's the kids? And she said, they're inside, and we're yelling to the fire department, you got to get the babies out of the house.
Was too shaken up to be seen on camera, but says she was present with the mother of the 3 kids as firefighters worked to get the children out of the home here along America Street.
There's 3 babies in that house. And they brought one child out, the oldest, and handed him to my husband. And he brought him to the lawn, and then they handed him a second child, and he brought him to the lawn, and we just kept screaming, there's still another baby in there.
Officials say the first two kids, a 5-year-old girl and 8-year-old boy, unfortunately died at a hospital. Eventually, the 3-year-old was recovered from the home. He was pronounced dead on scene. NOPD says the mother of the 3 kids called a little before midnight frantic, alerting them that their father, identified as Joseph Washington, had made threats that he would burn down the house with the kids inside.
He searched for Washington and found the vehicle he was caught on camera leaving the house in, partially submerged in the Mississippi River. Then, they received information that he was traveling in another car that they tracked down on the freeway. When they attempted to pull the car over, Washington exited the vehicle and jumped off the freeway on-ramp to the ground below, sustaining minor injuries. Police were then able to capture him before he could flee again. He was arrested and initially charged with 3 counts of second-degree murder and cruelty to children. But after his first appearance in court, the judge upgraded his charges, stating that it was a classic case of first-degree murder. Washington also had a long history of domestic abuse that led up to this heinous act against his own children that was well documented. In fact, the mother of his children placed a call for help just 9 days before he set the deadly fire.
We just got new information that 9 days ago, NOPD had showed up to that home after the mother of the children called 911 saying her ex-husband, Joseph Washington, was threatening her life.
911 was the location of the emergency. It's 4911 America Street, New Orleans, Louisiana.
This call was made October 9th, 9 days before police believed Joseph Washington set the fire to their home, killing the 3 children.
We have a past history of domestic violence, but he's like sending me threats saying if I come back to the house and my kids are still there, and he's saying that he will leave them in the house, and he's telling me not to come back to the house. If I come back to the house, he's going to kill me.
Here's what we've uncovered so far. Joseph Washington has a lengthy history of abuse. That started in 2015 with his then wife and mother of the 3 children. Washington was convicted of domestic abuse and battery at least twice in 2016 and was arrested on the same charges in 2018. In 2018, the mother filed for a restraining order against Washington, claiming he repeatedly hit and choked her and often attacked her while she was holding the children. In that document, the mother wrote, quote, Joseph said, quote, "Who should I kill first, you or the kids?" Then he started to choke me, push me back against the wall after he threw me on the floor while the baby was in my hands and repeated to choke me. He dragged me to the back to look for his gun, and when he couldn't find it, he said, quote, "I don't need a gun to kill you." I made an escape to the front of the door to scream for help. The mail lady called the police. In the divorce filing a year later, it states that after the mother got out free, the kids were still inside, stating, quote, "The defendant Washington then yelled out to the petitioner, the mother, that he will set the house on fire. The defendant then turned the stove on, causing the smoke to fill the house by the time police arrived. He was then arrested when police arrived. The judge then granted the divorce and gave the mother full custody.
So that evil POS had already threatened to burn the house down in the past, and had already stated that he had thoughts of killing his kids. So if you think you're going to hear me say something like, now he has to live with the guilt of killing his 3 precious children, don't worry, you won't. Because he doesn't give a shit. He won't feel a thing. Except maybe sadness that he lost his freedom. Because he is all he cares about. He's a monster. Pure evil. He'd have to be able to do what he did. Especially knowing the terror his children's mother felt, hearing them screaming on the phone as he told her he was going to set the house on fire with them in it. Knowing she'd race home to save them, only to get there too late. And despite her efforts to get help to her kids as quickly as she could by calling 911, she wasn't the only one to arrive too late to save their young lives. According to news reports, many are questioning and wondering why it took so long for the first responders to arrive at the blazing home after the mother's frantic 911 call for help came in shortly before midnight. Witnesses say help didn't even start to arrive to attempt to save the children until 12:14 a.m. To be more precise, the emergency response timeline was laid out by a New Orleans 911 chief in a press conference shared by Fox 8 News, where he states that the frantic call from the children's mother came in at 11:54 p.m., 6 minutes before midnight, claiming that her children were heard screaming on the phone and her ex threatened to burn their house down. But according to the chief, there were no police units available to respond to the call, so it was not immediately responded to. And even though the mother frantically conveyed that her ex was threatening to burn their house down and there were children inside, firefighters were not dispatched to the scene either, even though the police were not available. In fact, according to the timeline, the fire department was not dispatched to the scene until 12:09 a.m., when a 911 call came in from a neighbor that the home was already engulfed in flames. So, assuming their mother called 911 immediately after her ex told her what he was planning to do, and figuring that he started the fire shortly after getting off the phone with her, because he needed time to get it going and get out of there before police arrived, that fire was probably burning with those precious children trapped inside for a good 10 minutes or more before any available emergency services were even dispatched. Then, add on an additional 5 minutes until they arrived on scene, and you can do the math. So, as their mother was racing home to her children and calling 911 for help, desperately, thinking they'll arrive within minutes to keep the children safe, no one is responding to her home for a period of up to 15 minutes. And with a fire, I don't have to tell you that 15 minutes is an eternity. It is definitely the difference between life and death. Now, I'll play the timeline video for you later in this video, in case you're interested in watching it. But I have to say that I found some of the comments made by the chief, in light of the immense tragedy that occurred that night, to be very distasteful. He was laying out the timeline of events in an effort to defend the response time that night, and I understand that. But he says that when the mother called and said her ex was threatening them and her kids were screaming, he said that was all they knew at that point. And if the police were called to his house when his kids were young, every time they were heard screaming, they would be at his house all the time. Now, you can make of that what you will, but I found it to be in very poor taste in light of the urgency of her call. I wonder how many times a call about his kids screaming would have been coupled with and they're being threatened, or, and someone is threatening to burn their house down with them in it. Or how many times his young children were heard screaming at damn near midnight on a weekday, a school night. That, in and of itself, to me, should have been a huge red flag that those children were in trouble. They were 8, 5, and 3. They should have been in bed, sleeping. Instead, they were heard screaming in fear in the middle of the night. In my opinion, whether they believed their mother or not, the moment they knew the police were not available to respond to the call, the fire department should have been dispatched. There were young children in that home, and she said the person watching them was threatening to light their house on fire. Then, at least they would have responded quickly to help the children. And if there was no fire, at least they could make sure the children were safe. And if there was a fire, as there was, they would have been there within minutes to rescue the children, and maybe their little lives would have been saved. But the fire department wasn't even notified about the threat and was only dispatched after the 911 call from the neighbor who saw the fire. What if the neighbor was sleeping and didn't see it or hear it? Would their mother have raced home, thinking police were already there making sure her children were safe, only to arrive to her home in flames and no emergency personnel there? Because that's what would have happened if the neighbor hadn't called 911. And that's terrifying. According to the timeline, police weren't even available to respond to the call until after the fire department arrived, and they didn't arrive on scene until 25 minutes after the mother's 911 call. And to add insult to tragedy, when news outlets questioned why there were no police available to respond to the 911 call, they found that at least one unit in the area was already responding to a non-emergency call that had come in hours earlier. A councilwoman for the district says that slow response times have been an ongoing problem that she's been fighting for a while and will continue to fight for answers about.
Red flags regarding the NOPD's emergency response times in District 7. The night police say a father set fire to his home, killing his 3 children trapped inside. Ashlyn Brothers joins us now with those details. Ashlyn.
Well, Lauren, we've now learned police were dispatched to a dated non-emergency around that same time of the fatal fire, despite the Orleans Parish Communications District claiming no units were available.
Where are the police when you need them? That's the question.
All we needed was one officer just to come up. And maybe you could have saved those 2 kids that was at the door if you would have came in time.
City leaders and New Orleans East residents alike call into question the response times of the NOPD in District 7.
I've been raising the flag about issues at OPCD for I don't even know how long. I mean, from the previous director, I've been over and over and over again. And so it's like, if it's not this, if it's not 3 children we have lost in our city, then what? So I'm going to keep pushing. I'm going to keep fighting. Because these little kids are worth fighting for.
Councilmember Helena Moreno says she and her constituents deserve some answers.
I think that this is a lesson learned, and I feel that everybody involved is responsible for not the action of the individual, because he was a sad sap. However, emergency means emergency. If this woman is pleading out to you, begging you to get to that house, that could have been avoided.
It's bad. I'm pleading for the police officer. Please do something better. We need this out here. Y'all might not care, but we do as people and parents.
Moreno is grateful the chief has agreed to a multi-level review.
Even from the very onset intake level, all the protocols that need to be followed with a whole series of different questions that must first be checked off and answered before a call can even be sent out for dispatch.
Moreno says the city's crime analyst found and flagged an incident that happened on October 18th, adding that an officer had been dispatched to a Priority 1 non-emergency for an old shots fired, later turned destruction of property report just 11 minutes after a mother called 911 saying her ex-husband threatened to burn down a house with her 3 children inside. Now, the non-emergency call was 8 hours old. We don't know where the dispatching officer was coming from at the time, but we do know the 2 incidents in New Orleans East were about 3 miles apart and roughly a 10-minute distance from one another. NOPD units were dispatched 21 minutes after the mother called and arrived at 12:20 a.m., 5 minutes later.
I feel like I just did this about, 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago with Asia Davis, when I said, why did nobody come help her the first time that she called, when she called about domestic violence? Police officers showed up, 12 hours later. It happened again a second time, more than 12 hours later. And then the third time, it was because they were reporting her murder.
The NOPD announced yesterday it launched a Public Integrity Bureau investigation into police response to that fatal fire. Now, Councilmember Moreno says she appreciates Interim Chief Ann Kirkpatrick's urgency. She forwarded the incident to Kirkpatrick and says the non-emergency call will be included in that investigation.
The Asia Davis case referred to by the councilwoman is another tragic case of a 28-year-old mother who was murdered by her ex-boyfriend in May of 2023. In April, she placed 2 separate 911 domestic violence calls to police for help, and both calls went unanswered for 12 hours or more each, which is completely unacceptable and needs to be answered for and changed immediately.
Well, 12 hours, that's how long dispatch records show it took New Orleans police to respond to a woman who was calling for help from a man allegedly abusing her. Good evening, everyone. I'm Cherise Gibson.
And I'm Devin Bartolotta. Asia Davis was eventually killed by that man, investigators say. And now the city council wants to know why police took so long to get to her. Eleanor Tabone has the story.
Asia Davis is one of 6 women killed in New Orleans in the span of a month. According to dispatch records, the young mother called for help, but seemingly authorities failed her.
This woman reached out twice to the New Orleans Police Department through 911 and made complaints fearing for her life.
Kenya Davis is still grieving the loss of her 28-year-old daughter, Asia Davis.
She was my child. She was my daughter.
She was apparently killed by her boyfriend, Henry Talley Jr. Our partners at NOLA.com say he shot her, then ran over her.
We barely holding on.
Twice before her death, she called 911 for help. But dispatch records show on both April 6th and April 18th, her calls were downgraded. In both occasions, it took NOPD 12 hours to respond, and both calls were marked gone on arrival. NOPD says those calls were downgraded because the suspect had left the scene and there was no threat of imminent danger. Council President JP Morrell wants to know why a domestic violence complaint is not a priority.
It is hard for us as a city to have victims and survivors take us seriously. We don't prioritize their safety by thinking a 12-hour response on 2 complaints of domestic violence is acceptable.
Just what we see in this case regarding Miss Davis. Well, she's dead now. She's dead.
Domestic violence advocate Kim Sport says there's no excuse for why it took officers that long to get to Asia.
There's a reason why we have laws that distinguish simple battery from domestic abuse battery, and that's because of the threat of imminent harm to a victim of domestic abuse.
Eleanor Tabone, Eyewitness News.
Henry Talley Jr. has been arrested and is now facing a second-degree murder charge. NOPD says when it responded 12 hours later to Asia's calls, they tried to call her and knocked on the door but didn't get a response, so they marked their call gone on arrival.
That's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. And there is no excuse for it. And since it's been an ongoing problem, everyone is aware of it. Geez, I wonder how many abusers and killers know that nobody is coming to save their victims in any reasonable amount of time. So they use it to their advantage, to maybe hide evidence, clean up a crime scene, or get a real good head start making a run for it. Kind of really gives criminals the upper hand, doesn't it? While leaving their victims helpless and hopeless, not knowing if help will be arriving in time or not. Imagine being in danger and calling 911, not knowing that you better be ready to fight for your life for the next 12 hours until somebody sees fit to respond. Or frantically calling 911 because your children are in danger, expecting help to get to them before you can, but it never does. Or it arrives too late, despite your desperate pleas for them to hurry. That's not somewhere I'd want to live. And I don't blame the people who live there for questioning what the hell is going on in their communities and wanting better for themselves. They deserve better. And I'll be praying that they get better, along with the loved ones of Asia Davis and those 3 precious children who also deserved better, but didn't get it. I'll leave you with the chief laying out the response times during that horrific night, who doesn't think it's alarming that young children are heard screaming on a phone call to their mother in the middle of the night as their father threatens to burn their house down around them, in case you're interested in hearing what he has to say. But I won't blame you if you don't want to hear it. After about 2 minutes of listening to him and hearing him say that he's not trying to make light of a horrific situation, after comparing the screams of terrified children in the care of a psychopath in the middle of the night to the playful screams of his own overly rambunctious children as they maybe had a little too much fun roughhousing at his house, I had very little desire to hear anything more he had to say. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch and listen to these heartbreaking stories. Stay safe out there, and here is the response time briefing.
If anybody wants a copy of the timeline, please talk to Megan and she'll email it to you, which I'm sure everyone's going to want to do, but still I have to say that. So there are actually 3 separate CAD incidents created, 1 police, 1 fire, and 1 EMS. That is perfectly normal. While we have consolidated call taking and one set of people takes all the incoming calls, the incidents are created either simultaneously or sequentially, depending on how the call flows, for each of the public safety response agencies, New Orleans Police, New Orleans Fire, and New Orleans EMS. So, our first call was received at 11:54:41. And I've got the seconds there because in our world, seconds matter. There's a very big difference between 11:55 and 1 second and 11:55 and 59 seconds. So that's why we normally work. Our CAD system actually carries it out to milliseconds, but I didn't think that would be of any interest. So we got the first call. And I'm going to turn around and read it because my eyes are old, so I apologize. But at 11:55 and 35 seconds, the first incident was created in CAD, an NOPD incident for a domestic disturbance, code 2. So that's a lights and siren call, as you guys know. When our personnel, the emergency communication specialist, had sufficient information to put into the system. It included the initial assessment as a verbal domestic disturbance, and the notes say that at that point the caller had advised our person her kid's father is at location and called her on the phone. She heard her kids screaming. Now, in retrospect, we look at that and, oh my God, we got to get somebody there right now this minute. But that's all we knew. If you had called Night House and dispatched police when my kids were younger, anytime they were screaming, I would have had an officer stationed at my house all the time. That is not meant to make light of anything, but simply to illustrate that only what's there is what we knew. That's all we can react to. By 11:57:21, our emergency communications specialist continued going through the protocol with the caller, got the suspect information, name, description, etc. And additional information was provided. There are children present, ages 3, 5, and 7, and the complainant states subject has tapped her phone, been threatening them, and also threatened to burn the house down. Now, I apologize, this is not great English. Our call takers try to get the information in as quickly as possible. They don't worry about punctuation, correct spelling, things like that. At 11:59:27, so roughly 2 minutes and a few seconds later, our police dispatcher handling the 7th District toned out and broadcast this incident over the air. The reason that she toned it out and broadcast it is because there were no units in a clear status that she could simply dispatch someone to the call. Therefore, policy and procedure is for a code 2 call, if there are no units available, we hit the tone so everybody hears it in the field and then broadcast the incident out so that everyone on another call knows what's holding. And 30 seconds later, 11:59:56, the district rank in the 7th District was notified directly by the dispatcher of the holding call. Domestic disturbance, code 2, etc. At 8 minutes after midnight, almost 9 minutes, we got another 911 call from a neighbor, probably the one whose Ring camera video is being sent around, saying that there was a house on fire. And it's color-coded. Blue is police, red is fire, green is EMS as we go through and we get the final one. The NOFD incident was created less than a minute later, back 30 seconds later, which is well within NFPA standards for responding to fire 911 calls. In fact, a minute is allocated for that first creation process. So we're running ahead of the curve at that point. At 9:38, or 9 minutes and 38 seconds after midnight, so do the math, 16 seconds after the call was created, NOFD units were dispatched. Again, under NFPA standards, we have 2 minutes from receipt of call to dispatch of units. So we are again beating what the national standards and requirements are in getting the units rolling. Now, when we dispatch NOFD, for those of you not familiar, we have what's called station alerting. So as soon as it's hitting CAD to dispatch them, lights and tones go off in the district stations. A PA system opens up in the firehouse, and our dispatcher's voice is heard verbalizing and dispatching them to the incident, which is repeated twice for the firefighters as they're donning turnout gear, running to the trucks, getting on them, and getting rolling. Under national standards, I believe it's 4 minutes that they have to get to the call, but don't quote me on that one. You can look that up. We got another call reporting the fire at 12:11. And we got another call reporting the fire at 12:13 with additional information of children trapped in the home. At 14 minutes after midnight and 13 seconds, the first NOFD unit arrived on the scene. So again, that's how many minutes from dispatch to arrival? 9 to 14? Yeah, 5 minutes. They're within the standard, if I recall. At 15 minutes after midnight, NOPD units cleared and were dispatched on the call. They cleared from whatever they were on, and our dispatcher immediately assigned them and sent them to the call. Notice that fire is already on scene when that happened. At 16 minutes after midnight, the NOFD units requested EMS, and the call was what we call cloned, or the actual CAD incident was simply sent to EMS as an EMS incident for our EMS dispatchers to dispatch field units. At 18 minutes and 11 seconds, EMS units were dispatched. At 19:22, 2 children were removed from the home, or rescued from the home, pulled from the home by NOFD. At 20 minutes after midnight, the first NOPD unit arrived on the scene. At 29 minutes, the first EMS unit arrived on the scene and had patient contact a minute and a half later, and immediately broadcast that they were working 2 codes, or doing CPR on both children. At 48 minutes after midnight, NOPD had been working on their investigation, and we did the first citywide broadcast of the wanted suspect, the ex-husband, the perpetrator, the man who killed these children. The fire was placed under control at 40 minutes after midnight. That does not mean the fire was out. That means that NOFD had it under control and it was no longer spreading or getting bigger. At 57 minutes after midnight, or almost 1 a.m., EMS transported the 2 children to the hospital while still working an active code on both of them. I put this in here for your benefit. Within our computer-assisted dispatch system, when we enter an address, it shows up with any other calls we've had in the last 3 years at that address. 3 of these calls you're seeing now, because I generated it this morning, were the calls pertaining to the incident that we're worried about. There was one other domestic violence incident in July. That's the reason for the time lag between when my dispatcher received the CAD incident and when she broadcast it, because she was first looking at that previous incident to see what it was, saw that it was another domestic violence, and she beeped it out immediately and broadcast it for any 7th District units available. That's all the formal presentation I have for you. Well, now I'll take any questions that you guys have that I can answer.
Let's start on this side.
Okay. Megan?
Do you have any questions?
Yeah, just looking at that timeline, I guess, can you kind of, what goes through a call taker's mind and the stress and everything involved in taking a call, dispatching all of that, especially for a case like this where, you know, eventually we found out it was 3 children involved.
Exactly. Our call takers take each call as it comes. As part of their training, we work on coping strategies and doing their jobs and compartmentalizing what's coming in and suppressing your own emotions to not get involved. If 2 people on the call are both upset and not being rational, then nothing gets done. Normally, the caller is calling us on the worst day of their life. You know, people don't call 911 to say, hey, it's a great day, how's everything going? So all of our calls are not good things for the most part. This is a particularly bad thing. And as I said, we've got mental health engaged for our personnel after the fact in dealing with knowing now what happened in the trauma. But the important part is that our first responders are just like the responders in the field. They do their jobs, they do what needs to be done, they handle it with empathy but without getting wrapped up in the emotion. And somebody has to guide the call and get the information. An important point to bring up, there have been comments made about the protocols and all the questions and does it delay response. It doesn't. Priority dispatch, who we use for our question and answer protocols, has been around for a while. It's an internationally recognized system, and it's computerized question and answer, and as you go through and ask the questions, it branches and determines really what's going on. But it also recognizes a critical incident. So as soon as we get enough information to know who to send and where to send them, we get what's called a send point in priority dispatch. And at that point, the call goes to CAD and goes to the dispatcher. So there is no delay while she was asking the additional questions on what's the suspect description, tell me more about what's happening, we got the further information. It had already gone to the dispatcher. In an ideal world, we would have enough field units to be able to assign someone and send them to that call immediately. You guys are well aware we don't live in an ideal world now. So we broadcast it so that everyone knew it was holding. We will be following up with an OPD, with an OFD, trying to see if there's anything we could do different. If there's any other way we could get more information, anything else we could provide, any way else we could know what we know now.
Good. So are you saying that, you know, on the line you had on the screen, no units available. If there were to be an available NOPD unit, the response would have been faster to this fire?
That seems logical. There were no units available, therefore no one could be assigned to go to it. Now, if there had been a unit available that was the other side of the 7th district, who knows? You know, that's all pure speculation. But our policy is if there's a unit free for a code 2 call, they get assigned it. And that is NOPD's policy as well. If there are no units free, we hit the tone, we broadcast it, we then notify the platoon rank, which was 720.
I'm sorry, you may have already said this, but at the time when the initial call went out, was NOFD also notified at the exact same time?
No. NOFD was not notified until we received a call that there was a fire.
Even though the mother was saying he was threatening to burn the house down?
The mother said he was threatening. Current policies and procedures are not to dispatch fire because somebody says someone's going to set a fire. Now, whether, you know, in retrospect, who knows? That's why I say we're going to work with the NOPD domestic violence people, the mayor's task force, etc., to determine if there's some way that we can forecast or know that might should have been done. As of now, if we set fire units to every time somebody said there's going to be a fire, you know, at that point you're rolling fire trucks, code 2, endangering citizens, et cetera, et cetera. So someone has to deal with that, and I'll work with Superintendent Roman Nelson at the fire department to determine if they want to make any changes to our protocols.
Great.
But again, in retrospect, it's easy to know, yeah, would have been great to send fire as soon as they said he threatened to set a fire. But unfortunately, that's in retrospect. Nothing that we knew at that time pushed it past that point.
And you'll see in the timeline specifically where it says this part of the call, it said he's going crazy, he's threatening, and at that point the incident, and then later he says he's setting fire to the house. So
But he is threatened to. In no time did the original caller say he has set the house on fire, or if anything had been expressed as a certainty, there was a fire.
Right.
Yeah, there would have been an NOFD incident created and dispatched.
Right.
But he says he's going to. People say a lot of things. Sorry.
And I know you kind of touched on this, but knowing that there were previous incidents.
A single incident is all we do about it.
Okay. Well, knowing that.
Just the one.
Knowing that there was a previous incident, why was dispatch not immediately reaching out to EMS in this situation, considering the time it took for EMS to get there?
Again, until we know there's a reason for EMS, we can't send EMS just on a hunch or a hint. We have to know there's a need for them, and based upon what was known at the time, there was nothing to tell us we needed to send EMS.
Were any policies deviated from?
I have my training compliance team looking into it. It's obviously a very detailed incident. The initial pass-through is that all of our personnel followed standards, followed protocols, and did what they were supposed to do. We are not going to take that initial pass as gospel. We're going to dive down deeper and make sure that is indeed the case. But there is nothing glaring, nothing has jumped out as we doing anything outside of policy or wrong.
Following this, are there any policies you feel need to be changed?
Right now, I'm not aware of any. I don't know, but that's what I said. We'll follow up with the Mayor's Domestic Violence Working Group. We'll talk to the city council members. We'll talk to fire and police and see if we can figure out what could have been done differently, if anything. Ultimately, it's a tragedy perpetrated by an individual. And even putting police officers on every corner in the city, you can't stop every crime. So we'll see what we can do, but unfortunately, we don't have minority report at this point.
And last question, if there was a unit in the area for NMPD, do you think the outcome could have been different in this situation?
That's pure speculation. I don't know. I don't want to inflame anything or speculate on that.
Good afternoon. You mentioned City Council right now. Dr. Vegno is making a presentation regarding domestic violence and homicides. I was just there, and Councilmember Moreno had a very heavy-hearted opening statement talking about domestic violence and, of course, this incident that we've all been reporting
I was watching that before I came over here.
So you heard her comments about domestic violence and how there needs to be a little bit more urgency in responding to these. Do you have any response to what she was saying?
All I can say is to look at the facts of the timeline. We broadcast it within 4 minutes of the call hitting us and broadcast it out for a police response. That's all I can do.
Knowing, and you kind of touched on this when Aubrey asked, but knowing this emphasis that City Council wants to put on domestic violence, is there anything that OPCD can do? I know there's a protocol system, and that system's been in place for so long, but do you think that domestic violence calls maybe need to be changed in the sense of how they're taken in and how they're responded to within that protocol?
Again, given that less than 4 minutes after the call started, it was in CAD and being broadcast as a domestic violence. Initial send point is where is it, what's happening, and information for responder safety. That's when it went out. That's when it was first sent to the dispatcher. The dispatcher at that point is looking at it and looked at the previous history and saw there was a previous domestic violence at that location. About the same time as when the update was coming in with the threat and broadcast it out. So to answer your question, we don't know what we don't know. All we can do is try to explore it, and that's the purpose of the Domestic Violence Committee. We've been working with Dr. Marino, we've been working with EMS, we've been working with NOPD Special Victims Unit, and anything that we can do to help provide better response for it, we're more than happy to do so. But the real important aspect is that the protocols are there for a reason, so that we can accurately determine what's going on, and we map that to the incident types of the agencies to determine default priority and response. That all worked in this case just fine. What else we can do to more prioritize domestic violence, I don't know. It already was a code 2. It was already broadcast immediately. So to answer your question, I don't know if there's anything else we can do. If we discover it, we'll do it.
Just for clarity, can you just explain what a code 2 is and maybe
I'm
what's
sorry.
the difference?
I think so. There are basically 3 priorities for calls. Code 0 is what would be called an APR response for a police officer to call back to take the report over the phone. Excuse me. Code 1 is generally referred to as no lights, no siren, drive at the speed limit, etc. It's a pass type call or a lower priority call. Code 2 is lights and siren priority call.
So essentially code 2 is like the most urgent.
Correct.
Thank you.
So, I can't speak for everyone, but I do want to say, I think we have empathy for the dispatchers. I mean, it's a difficult job. I think you really don't know what it's like until you're in that chair. So I just do want to say that.
Thank you. My team will appreciate that.
Yes, yes. And, you know, I understand the trauma that comes with it as
And
well.
I'll even say, if anyone wants to see what it's like, we'll be happy to do a sit-along. You will not be able to record, you will not be able to take pictures, you know, etc. But we will allow you to come in and experience it if anybody is interested, or if any of our city council members or anybody else in city government wants to come and see what it's like. We'll get you a headset, we'll sit you down with a call taker, you'll sign an NDA for anything that happens to come up while you're there, and we'll let you experience it, because it's a very tough job. I couldn't do it. Okay, I'm not built that way, and I understand that. But my people, the heroes under the headset, who spend their days doing this, are ultimately among the hardest working public safety people in the city of New Orleans. You know, there's a reason we got the state to pass the law that said, acknowledging they are truly first responders, like the field personnel for police, fire, and EMS. Didn't mean to short circuit your question.
No, you're fine. I guess my question is, do you think, hindsight is 20/20, but do you think anywhere a ball was dropped, and when I say a ball is dropped, maybe there was a lack of resources, or do you all look at it right now and see it as just a tragedy that couldn't have been avoided? Is there?
I can only speak to us, to OPCD. I'm the interim executive director for the communication district. So taking the calls and handling the dispatch is our responsibility. As of right now, this minute, based on that initial first look and listening to the calls, etc., I don't believe we dropped any balls. I believe all of our personnel did what they were supposed to, the way they were trained, in an empathetic but not emotionally involved manner, and figured out what was happening, where it was, who needed to go, and got everything done to make that happen.
And then, if during the call, the caller, she says that, and you know, I don't have the call right here, but you all say initially she said he's threatening, but apparently she didn't finish the sentence. And then later the dispatcher asked if anyone was in danger. And I think that may have confused some people. Do you think the dispatcher should have already known that there was a possibility of danger by her saying that her kids are yelling?
It wasn't the dispatcher who asked the question, it was the call taker.
Okay. That's what
It's our terminology, and it's important because we have the emergency communication specialists who get the calls in and talk to the callers and enter it into the computer-assisted dispatch system. And we have the dispatchers who actually take it when it gets to them, dispatch the field units, track them, et cetera, et cetera. So the call taker followed the protocol and got the initial information that she could out of the caller, who was understandably very upset at her job receiving these threats over the phone, and dive deeper to get the further information as she hit that in the protocol long after the call had been created and sent. We hit the first send point, it went to dispatch. Dispatcher was already looking to see that history and determined, I need to get this out now. In the meantime, that next update came in, which delayed to look at that and see if, it could have been somebody saying, oh, never mind, it's okay. my mama's there or whatever. It wasn't, but it could have been, so we need to make sure the dispatcher has all the information before she starts sending units. So we had that slight delay due to that. None of it delayed the fact that we knew it was a code 2 domestic violence call and needed to get people going.
And then, so I guess explain the process. It's the call taker, and then are the dispatchers also here? How does?
Yes, the dispatchers are sitting in different places of the room. And again, if you want a visual, we'll take you in after this is over with, and it might clear it up for you. But the dispatchers are over here, getting the calls, typing the information into the computer-assisted dispatch system, answering the questions, etc. They hit the send point. It goes over within CAD to the dispatcher for the appropriate discipline, police, fire, EMS, or all of them. And the constant updating occurs as long as the call taker is still on the phone, or other calls come in and other people are supplying information, which also goes into the same CAD incident.
Since you were saying there's a difference between the call taker and the dispatcher, so first the call taker is speaking to the person reporting the emergency,
Correct.
And then do they transfer it to?
No, the call taker keeps speaking on the phone.
Okay.
That's why asking the questions furthermore and giving the pre-arrival instructions doesn't delay any response caused by us. That is one person or multiple people talking to multiple callers about the incident. The information goes through the computer-assisted dispatch system to the dispatcher, who knows the call taker is still on the phone updating as they get more information, but they are looking at it on their screen and handling their units on their system.
Okay.
So that way, unlike the film 911 where she got the call and then jumped out and ran in the car and drove, etc., that's not how it works.
Okay.
Are you done?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. In the back.
Thanks for the transparency with this conference, and also just, thanks to the first responders that worked this really horrific scene.
That's what I intend to do going forward. Is anything happens, you guys will be the second or third to that.
Cool. I have a question kind of about general trends around domestic calls. I look at the NOPD's public-facing calls for service dashboard, and I noticed in May and June there was a pretty large spike in domestic-related calls. I was wondering if you can speak to the trend, what we're seeing now, any possible drivers for this recent uptick?
I don't know. We don't get into that here. That's for their crime analysis to do, and that's in NOPD's silo. I'm sure people can go on at unlimited as to why or what. We simply deal with the fact that it's happening and get the resources there.
Okay, and this might also be out of your wheelhouse, but I am curious to know whether Fire has told you about what started the fire.
No, we haven't heard anything about that.
Anybody else want to go again?
I got one. I guess what is the overall message you might want to say to the rest of the city, specifically those that might suffer from domestic violence or a domestic violence situation?
Well, I'll echo what Dr. Avegno has said repeatedly, what the general message is. If you're in an abusive relationship, call for help. Get help. There's help out there. There's all kind of help. Don't wait till it turns violent. It's not going to get any better. Studies have shown that people don't stop being abusers until outside intervention occurs, and sometimes not even then. So there are all kind of resources out there. All you got to do is pick up the phone and call. And please call for help. If you're in an abusive relationship, if you know someone in an abusive relationship, help them get out. We're all here, and every one of us in public safety would vastly prefer to help people get out and move on with successful lives rather than dealing with the ultimate consequence like we ran into this time.
Aubrey, did you have another question?
Is there a national standard that you'll follow when it comes to the call coming in and the amount of time it takes to reach out for additional assistance?
The only national standard with regard to call processing time is on the fire side. That's NFPA publishes standards for that. They're actually part of PIAL, the insurance industry, and it's driven by the insurance industry. And there's also science behind fire in that if it's X minutes before you get water on a fire, it will double in size. So there's a whole lot of science in that world. And as a result, there are standards as to how long to take the call, how long to dispatch the units, how long before the units arrive on scene. That's how NOFD determines where firehouses are. And when the firehouses were down after storms, etc., where they were going to stage units at, it didn't have a house to go to in order to keep that response time within the parameters necessary. The only national standard in our world is the call answer time. How long the call rings, the incoming emergency call rings before we have someone answer it. And that is 90% of incoming 911 calls in 10 seconds, 15 seconds, and 95% in 20 seconds. We're not meeting that on a regular basis now due to staffing issues. We don't have enough bodies, pure and simple. We tried running mandatory overtime. We looked really well stat-wise for the first half of the year because of that, but mandatory overtime also burns out my people, and I start losing them, which exacerbates the problem. So we have very reluctantly canceled that, and we're answering about 80% within that first 10 seconds.
Yeah, we're going to wrap that
And
up.
we're continuing to work to fill the slots. I've got open recs. If anybody is interested in working at 911 and taking calls or becoming a dispatcher, please reach out to us. We'll be running another class right after the first of the year.
Are we good? I think we're
Anybody else? Okay, thank you guys very much for coming.
Thank you.